Hi, and welcome to mini lecture number 2 on the background for the Oresteia and on the House of Atreus and some of the information that might be useful for you to understand and work with the Oresteia. So let's talk about the House of Atreus. This goes with a PDF that I've also put up this today called simply the House of Atreus. The House of Atreus is a long held house that begins with Tantalus, and Tantalus decides to test the nature of the gods to see if they're truly omniscient. And so he kills his only son, Pelops, and he feeds him to the gods, puts him on the gods' table, and says, "Oh, this is delicious." All the gods but one, that's Demeter, and Demeter's busy chatting and flirting, recognize that they're being fed a meal that's unwholesome. So they don't eat it, but Demeter eats Pelops' shoulder. When they realize what's happened, they sentence Tantalus to be forever thrown into Hades, where he is up to his chest in water, fresh, delicious water, and he has a delicious group of fruits hanging above his head. And every time he goes to drink, he can't get the water, it lowers, and every time he goes to eat, the fruit gets higher, and so he's forever tantalized by his own sin. But even after everything that's happened to Pelops, the gods remake him, and they give him an ivory shoulder, and you'd think that would make him an okay guy maybe, but no, it's not. Pelops is not a good man. He tries to court a princess named Hippodamia, and her father has none of it, says, "We don't want anything to do with your family." And so he then makes a bet with Hippodamia's father that if I can win in a chariot race, you must let me marry your daughter. King, who's never been beat, says, "Sure, why not?" Pelops, what he doesn't know about Pelops, and this informs a lot about the whole family. What he doesn't know about Pelops is that Pelops has conspired with Myrtilus, and Myrtilus is the king's chariot master. And Myrtilus is promised one night with Hippodamia if he'll murder the king by setting up his chariot to fail, which he does. And so Pelops beats the king, gathers the hand of Hippodamia, and on the night in question, he then murders Myrtilus from behind, and with his dying breath, Myrtilus curses Pelops and all of his progeny. And so Pelops and Hippodamia then have three or four children. They have Chrysippus, who is one of Hippodamia's children already. Atreus and Thyestes, who are Hippodamia's natural children, conspire. They murder Chrysippus and are then banished. Right. Once their father passes away, they then vie for the throne. And both Thyestes and Atreus win the throne at given times, and then they topple each other. It's kind of like watching Game of Thrones. But it all culminates when Atreus finds out that his brother has been sleeping with his queen. And he then decides he's got to take action. So he brings in both of Thyestes' children, and he murders them, and he cooks them up in a stew. And he invites his brother over. He says, "Thyestes, because I'm now the king, I want to make up with you. I want to be your brother again. And so have this feast with me." It's very common, have a meal. Let's sit down and do it. And so Thyestes eats heartily. And at the end of the meal, Atreus then throws back a curtain, and there are the hands, head, and feet of Thyestes' children. And Atreus then says, "Wow, wasn't that delicious?" Thyestes then is obviously, terribly affected by this, but he's the one who is punished by the gods, which is interesting. He is exiled forever because of his cannibalism. It is at the he wanders the Grecian world until he comes to the oracle at Delphi, who tells him that if he wants revenge, He won't have it in his lifetime, but that he must have a child with his own daughter Pelopia, and that child would grow up to kill Atreus, and he does. That child becomes Aegisthus, who we're going to meet in the Oresteia. And Aegisthus is Clytemnestra's lover. And so one of the things we find out from this long and terrible saga of this family is that almost nothing good will ever come of the house of Atreus. Now, where does that leave us? Atreus's living children are twin brothers Agamemnon and Menelaus. And they're one set of twins that we see in the Oresteia. The other are the twin sisters Clytemnestra and Helen. And Clytemnestra and Helen are they are the daughters of Zeus and Leda. And Zeus, he takes Leda. Zeus was very famous for taking whatever form he could to have sex with human women. And so in the case of Leda, he takes the form of a swan and she hatches an egg, and out of that egg come Helen of Troy, we now know as Helen of Troy, and Clytemnestra. And they're both of them beautiful twin sisters. Helen marries Menelaus. Clytemnestra marries Agamemnon. And so we sort of see that at the beginning of the story. Now, this brings us to another backdrop for the Oresteia, which is the Trojan War. Now, one of the things that we find out here at the beginning of Agamemnon is that the watchman has been watching for a decade for any sign at all from Troy that the Greeks and Troy have won. And at the very beginning of this play, we see the watchfires, which have been very cleverly set up by Clytemnestra. She's very, very conniving. She's very, very smart. So she's set up a series of watchfires from Troy all the way back home. And this tells her that her husband has been victorious. Now, one might think she set up the watchfires because she loves her husband, but there's another reason she set up the watchfires, because she has a plan. Part of this plan, and this is what's explained at the very beginning of the Oresteia, part of this plan has to do with that curse of Artemis. And Artemis is a goddess of hunting and also a goddess of wind. So one of the things we find out is that Artemis is troubled by the Trojan War. And it's very, very easy to, and we've for generations have blamed Helen of Troy for what happens to Troy. And Troy was a real city. It's in Turkey. And it's an ancient city. It's gone. One of the things we know about Troy is that it existed. Dig sites and archaeology has, all of that has produced enough evidence to show us this is Troy. The other thing we know about Troy is that something cataclysmic happened to it. Basically, it was a huge city and none of it exists anymore. And we've seen this kind of destruction in the 20th century and in the 19th century with modern warfare. But this is literally a city that no stone was left on stone. And so we have the walls and we have some of the main buildings, but it simply was demolished. And so we know this. It's really easy to blame Helen of Troy. Later on in British literature, Christopher Marlowe will write, "Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships?" When looking upon Helen of Troy. The very truth of the matter is Troy was probably destroyed for economic reasons and for another old, much more ancient reason, which is hospitality. One of the rules, hard and fast rules of the ancient world, was that law of hospitality. If you took someone into your house, there were certain expectations that you must follow. One of them was obviously don't murder me while I'm sleeping in your house, but another one was just simple, what you would consider today. Paris, who is the brother of Hector, so we have two brothers at the beginning of the story, Hector and Paris, Menelaus and Agamemnon. Paris, who is the younger brother of Hector, and Hector is a warrior prince, much like Agamemnon, much like Menelaus. Hector is one of the great warriors of the Iliad. Paris is more of a lover, and he is preferred by Athena. He's an intellectual guy. He's a good-looking guy, but he's very much a lover. He is very much Orlando Bloom compared to, say, Brad Pitt or Eric Bana. But The rule that Paris breaks, and he does so while under the auspices of hospitality. He seduces Helen. She falls in love with him. He then hides her on his ship back to Troy, and invites then revenge. And that brings a second very important theme to the Oresteia, and that is, why are we going to war in Troy? Some of the choruses, when we look at different translations of the Oresteia, call the war on Troy the whore war. Again, blaming Helen. In fact, it's Paris's lack of hospitality and honoring these old rules which really brings ruin to him and his people. And we'll talk about what happens to the rest of the people in Troy later on as we move to Rome and Roman literature. But a couple things. Artemis has a dream. And the Greeks listen to their dreams, and Artemis is a goddess. She dreams of two twin eagles attacking a pregnant hare. And this begins to raise a very, very interesting specter, which is one woman, one man, Paris and Helen. They abscond to Troy, and Menelaus and Agamemnon's revenge, their plan from the very beginning is to go to Troy and destroy it utterly and kill every man, woman, and child in Troy. That's their equal justice. And so one of the things that we see in this is that when we look at revenge, the question becomes, is vengeance justice? Is it equal to the task? In other words, Paris has stolen Helen. Does that mean that every man, woman, and child in Troy must die? To Agamemnon and Menelaus, absolutely it does. But to Artemis, it doesn't. So what does Artemis do? She sets the wind against the fleet. So she essentially makes it impossible for Agamemnon and Menelaus to undertake their war against Troy. And the only way that we find out that Agamemnon can, in fact, move his ships in any way is to sacrifice his child, his youngest daughter, Iphigenia. And Iphigenia is one of three. You have Orestes, who is the oldest boy. You have Electra, who's the middle daughter. And then you have Iphigenia. And Iphigenia is, she's a teenager, let's think 14 or 15 years old. And Calchas, the seer, tells Agamemnon, if your ships are going to sail, you must sacrifice your daughter to the wind. That's the only way you're getting out of here. And Calchas himself doesn't even really believe that Agamemnon would ever do it. But what does Agamemnon do? He tricks his daughter into coming down to the harbor. He then has her seized. He binds her mouth so she cannot call out to him anymore, and he kills her. This is what the gods wanted. This is what has to happen. And so the winds are then broken, and Agamemnon and the rest of them sail off. Now they're gone a total of 10 years at this point. And we look at, it takes them 10 years to get there, and then they're on the shore. So we're decades out by this point. And Clytemnestra has ruled in Agamemnon's stead, and she's been a pretty good, according to the old men, she's been a pretty good queen. They don't trust her. And one of the things I want you to pay attention to is you look through the number of times which the chorus refers to Clytemnestra as having a man-like intelligence. It's almost as if they're blaming her for being cunning. One of the great questions here is, again, this is a revenge cycle. And revenge cycles they're beginning with an ultimate sin, and then we are moving towards vengeance. Clytemnestra takes vengeance on Agamemnon, and we'll look very carefully at how that happens, and how she tries to make sure he damns himself enough to get there. Another character I want you to pay close attention to is Cassandra, and she's a tragic figure. Cassandra is a priestess of Apollo, and she is raped in the temple of Apollo during the siege of Troy, and because of that, she's cursed. which is, this is, we punish women. So she is cursed, and her curse is that she will be she has the gift of sight, and all of her predictions are correct, but no one will ever believe her. So everything Cassandra yells out in this play, while the old men are sort of saying, this is madness, it's 100% accurate. She predicts the ending of the first play. She predicts her own demise, but she's really a tragic figure. No matter what she says, no one will believe her, and we sort of see that. So hopefully this gives you some backdrop. Orestes doesn't exist. Electra doesn't exist in this first play. Our main characters are Clytemnestra and, of course, Agamemnon, for whom the play is named. And so we look very carefully at their interaction. Aegisthus introduces himself at the very end, and he tries to take credit, which is kind of interesting, but we don't believe him because he simply shows up way too late. And one of the things that we're looking at here is the price of revenge, right? And what it does to both family structure, government structure, and really societal structure. The second play we're going to look at is also a revenge play. It's a shorter play, and it's the plot's very simple. And I will post a mini lecture on that in the next day or two. The password for this week's quiz is Agamemnon. Welcome. Thank you.